Hello and welcome to the Consumer Credit Matters podcast. I'm your host, William Black. In this episode, I'm joined by my very special guest, Charlie O'Shea, credit expert and returning podcast guest. This time to discuss Carvana's very recent earnings report for the third quarter, stellar earnings report, really remarkable operational achievements across the board, as they've been on a very hot streak since emerging from the debt restructuring that took place about 2 years ago. And we discussed that in some depth and how that colors some of the statistics that have been coming out and their future trajectory, as it were, in addition to the context of not only the used car market, but the macroeconomic environment as well. So do join us for this, I think, very educational and interesting conversation about Carvana and the used car market. I do hope you join us, and thank you as always for listening. Charlie O'Shea, welcome back.
Hey, Will, how you doing?
Good. How you doing?
I'm good.
Great. Well, thank you for coming back. I guess this is your second appearance on the podcast.
So you asked me back. I must have done something right the first time.
Absolutely. One of our most popular episodes, in fact,
Wow.
If not the most watched episode of the Consumer Credit Matters podcast. So you have that title going for you.
Hey, that and total consciousness on my deathbed,
Well, look, we asked you to be back on this time for something very specific. Carvana just had their third quarter earnings call, which was certainly reason to get an expert like you back on the line to discuss. It was just a stellar, record-breaking in many respects, earnings release for them. They've been on a tear now for the last several quarters, kind of coming back from the brink of what some believe was, bankruptcy, not that long ago, a couple years ago. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I listened to the call. I know you did as well, and it was a bit of a love fest.
Yeah.
I have to say, there was a lot of deserved, I think, congratulations going to Carvana on their execution of a strategy, a comeback strategy that has been working quite remarkably well in the face of some adversity as well, which I'm sure we're going to get into. But it did focus on operations and operational execution and building out efficiencies. That was kind of the primary focus as I read, their metrics and their qualitative strategic direction and focus. And they've made some very, very, high level achievements. Just to put a few numbers out there for folks in terms of the numbers, and we're not going to dwell on this in the call, but just to put it out there as a context and frame of reference. They had net income of $148 million. They had record adjusted EBITDA of $429 million, record GAAP operating income of $337 million. They sold over 100,000 vehicles in the third quarter, so they're on pace to sell over 400,000 vehicles this year. Just astounding numbers, and a lot more in terms of
gross profit per unit.
Gross profit per unit, thank you, was also a record number, speaking to some of the operational efficiencies that they're now yielding in their execution. So just putting that on the table now, wanted to get your quick takeaway from that call as well and the earnings release, Charlie.
It's interesting. I covered Walmart for a long time. I covered Amazon for a long time, as you know. I see a lot of parallels here. When you make investments, if you have a solid business model and you make investments, they typically pay off if you know what you're doing. And these guys know what they're doing. I mean, no one has questioned the tech ability, the need in the market for something like this. When I was still covering auto retail, as an analyst, pretty much every CEO in my universe, and I covered the large publics and a few of the large privates, they were all looking at Carvana to see if it was going to work, much like brick and mortar retail looked at Amazon to see if it was going to work. And then you kind of get a free ride on, the old story, the first guy through the wall gets beat up pretty good. These guys got beat up pretty good. But I think the strategic moves they've made, ADESA was a moonshot for these guys. I know there was a lot of controversy in the market when they bought it. They overpaid, et cetera, et cetera.
Let's talk about that just to
Yeah.
set it up for people who might not be aware of who ADESA is, when it was purchased, for how much.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like you said, a very big purchase for them.
Yeah.
It was over $2 billion, as I recall.
Yeah, two and change. All with that.
And this is a wholesale. This is an auction, auto auction company, basically giving Carvana access to wholesale vehicles, right?
Right.
Maybe take it from there, because I think that's an important thing for people to understand if they're not that close to the Carvana story.
ADESA has 55-ish, 55, 56. I'm not great at math, as you remember. Sites throughout the U.S. And if there's a map in the presentation that shows the ADESA sites, and if you look at them, you'll say, gee, they've got pretty much the entire country covered, in some radius around those sites. Yeah, they do. Those sites give them auction capability, but more importantly, I think over the long term, reconditioning sites, which will cut down on, and it's already doing it, their transportation costs have gone way down since they bought ADESA.
Right.
That's going to continue. That is similar to Amazon building warehouses to get product closer to the customer. That's similar to Walmart building supercenters to get product closer to the customer. And Walmart's, the stat was 95% of the population lives within 10 miles of a Walmart store, something like that. Carvana is going to be in a position where they're going to be able to make those types of statements down the road. Ernie talked yesterday, either on the call or I think it was on the call or on his appearance with Phil LeBeau on CNBC, about same day delivery. Let's put that aside. Okay, that's kind of that's a pipe dream for now. And let's not focus on it.
It's a teeny tiny percentage of their sales.
If you can do it, great. If you can, it's not going to be. If you can do it, is it a game changer? Potentially. Cars can be impulse buys. You go to a dealer, you drive the car home in the same day. But what ADESA really gives them, as you said earlier, access to vehicles, which when I first started covering these guys, when Moody's first rated the company, the biggest concern I saw was access to vehicles. Because they were not getting, at the time they weren't getting trades. They were buying virtually all their vehicles at auctions, which is expensive. Then they started buying them off the street. We'll come and pick your car up, et cetera, et cetera. And full disclosure, I've sold 2 cars to Carvana, and the experience was wonderful, easy, no problem at all done online. Truck showed up in front of my house, loaded the cars.
The Carvana branded truck?
Exactly, yeah. One guy shows up with the flatbed, verified that, the engine was in the engine compartment and all that kind of stuff, because you send them pictures and all this kind of stuff. And it's a great model. And they do the same thing to deliver. The lack of brick and mortar is similar to Amazon not having brick and mortar. They don't have the overhead. That's meaningful. Dealerships are incredibly expensive to run. Brick and mortar car dealerships are incredibly expensive to run. Franchise dealers, even Joe's used car lot, requires a decent amount of capital to run. They don't have to worry about that. The vending machines are a great marketing tool. I live in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. My son lives in downtown Philly with his wife. I drive by one of their vending machines every time I go see them. They're really cool, but they're a marketing ploy. Let's be honest. But they're really cool, and as a marketing tool, they're very effective. So these guys have got things in place now, and they've got excess capacity in the reconditioning centers. I think Ernie said they can do 1 million cars. Well, as you said, they're going to sell 400,000 this year. They've got 600,000 excess capacity. One of the callers, I can't remember who it was on the earnings call yesterday, said, well, isn't that expensive? Let's take a step back. The best retailers in the world, Walmart, Costco, Target, brick and mortar, always had excess distribution capacity to grow into. The nightmare scenario in Target experiences in Canada was trying to grow distribution into a store network. You can't do it. You have supply chain outages, out of stocks. That's one of the main reasons Target failed in Canada. Walmart always had 1.5 years worth of distribution capacity that they had to grow into. Is it costly? Yeah, but it's an investment. It's no different than Amazon building data centers for AWS demand. You have to think outside the box a little bit when you look at Carvana. But the key to me is the addressable market of 40 million vehicles a year.
Right.
400,000 is, help me with the math. You're the quant on the call. It's 1%. And the largest used car dealer in the United States is CarMax. They don't get 2%.
Right.
So there's a huge amount of runway here for these guys.
Very diffuse market. Yeah.
Exactly. And their CarMax exploited the franchise dealers' unwillingness to sell used cars. Before the financial crisis in 2007, 2008, the franchise dealers, and I rated them, were wholesaling 80 to 90% of their trade-ins. And just, getting rid of the cars. And where did those go? ADESA, Manheim. Okay, now we know that Carvana owns ADESA. Hold that thought for a second. After the financial crisis, they said, wait a minute, we're losing all this profit potential with used vehicles. We're losing the finance and insurance, and a big chunk of Carvana's gross profit per vehicle is on the finance side. Let's set that aside for a second because I'm just going to focus on cars. So the franchise dealers say, all right, we got to figure out a way to do this. Well, so they did. They started keeping their trades, putting some money into them. The manufacturers helped them out because the certified programs kind of exploded. Only a franchise dealer can sell a manufactured certified vehicle. So they had, they kind of had a protective bubble around that part of the business. You put a warranty on it. Costs about $2,000 to get a vehicle through the certification process. If you're a franchise dealer, the OEM's got to look at it and all that kind of stuff. And you sell them for a premium, you put a warranty on them, and everybody's happy. So they started to ramp up their used car businesses. CarMax was already in the game, and CarMax had already been eating their lunch for several years. Same thing happens with Carvana with the franchise dealers. Now the franchise dealers have great used businesses. Some of them, Lithia's got Driveway, Penske's got Car Shop, AutoNation has standalone used stores. They've all got them because they finally got religion. But they were doing nothing online. They were doing service appointments, and you could shop for a car on a website. They were clunky.
Well, CarMax has an e-commerce.
CarMax has a really good platform. But the franchise dealers were way late in the game, and they would all admit this.
Yep.
Technology, all that. I mean, think about it. You go into a franchise dealer, what do you see in the finance manager's office that scares, if you're a tech person, it scares you? A dot matrix printer. I mean, they're the only people in the world still buying them. Not even medical offices.
Rental car companies, I'm pretty sure.
Yes, exactly. It's like, my God, you go into the dot matrix printer business and make a fortune. So Carvana Ernie sees this, Ernie and his dad see this opportunity online. And they start going after it.
Yep.
It costs a lot of money to build an online presence. And that's why the franchise dealers stood back and waited. It's similar to brick and mortar retail. And I hate to keep going back to this, but I see serious parallels here.
Yeah.
Brick and mortar, I heard all the stories, they got too many stores. They didn't know how big online would get. They knew how their stores would perform. If you've got $1 billion in your bucket, you're sitting in Bentonville, Arkansas in 2011, where are you going to put it? Gee, we can build super centers. We can try this online stuff. You're going to build super centers. So you're late to the game, but at least you have a platform to look at. Carvana built the online platform for the franchise dealers to look at and say, gee, this works, this works, this works. But they're way ahead of the game right now. I mean, they are. So if you look at their advertising budget, let me finish this thought for a second. If you look at the progression or the digression, if that's a word, of their advertising spend as a percentage of revenue over the last 6 or 7 years, it's down at like 1% and change. They built the brand out. They don't need to do it anymore. That was a huge expense when they were still still unprofitable. That was driving it, advertising and marketing expense. That's gone. Now they've got a brand. They've got brand recognition. They've got brand equity. And the consumer's comfortable with it to the extent that the franchise dealers are going crazy trying to keep improving their online businesses to keep up with these guys. They're never going to catch them. It's like Walmart trying to catch Amazon online.
Yeah, they've got what's it called, launch velocity at this point,
and a competitive moat.
Right. So let me just try to summarize what we've talked about so far, because you mentioned a lot of different dynamics. I just want to see if I can bring it all together. You have an e-commerce exclusively e-commerce platform that as it
Yep.
began with, some success in the beginning, but clearly room for improvement around the distribution.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue also the acquisition part of their business that needed to be built out more as they aspired to become a national chain.
Right.
And just to paint a very clear picture, the more distribution centers and reconditioning centers you have, the closer you are literally to your customers, and the more inventory that you can store at these centers or ADESA or wherever they come from, the more selection you have for your customers, which is obviously these kind of feed on themselves in a positive, virtuous cycle, right?
Yeah.
But all of these things, take time and B, are very costly kind of acquisitions to make and then integrate into your business. So back to ADESA, this was a big acquisition, as we mentioned, 2.2 billion, call it.
Yeah.
Acquisitions, but it was completely in line. Strategically, it made perfect sense. Now, you could argue that, it was, certainly in hindsight, you could say it caused a near-death experience for the company.
Absolutely.
So it was too big. It was wrongly timed. It was just, in that sense, it was bad luck. In hindsight, but the long-term strategic vision, this makes absolutely perfect sense to build out what they're trying to build out.
They will reap the benefits of this acquisition in perpetuity. This is, again, going back, Walmart was building out its online business. They had a really talented guy running it for them. All of a sudden, Jet.com comes on the market. Over $3 billion. For Walmart, that was, dinner for, a team type money. But they buy it. And what did they get? They got the platform, they got the algorithm, they got a guy. They got Mark Lowry. What happened to Walmart's online business after that? It went to the moon. Amazon, spinning out, starting to report AWS separately. We've seen, the numbers yesterday were insane from AWS. Mm-hmm. What did that come from? Excess capacity that they built up around the holidays to handle the surge in shopping. And then they have all this computing capability. They do that. They buy Whole Foods. What did Whole Foods get them? Whole Foods hasn't knocked the cover off the ball by any stretch of the imagination. Amazon's still not a huge player in food, but it gave them insight into what brick and mortar is all about. And it's hard to run brick and mortar retail. It's really hard to run a food business. Walmart buying Flipkart, $17 billion in India, still hasn't made money yet. It will. If you can see, nobody predicts the future, but if you have a good platform, and there's an opportunity there, you may only get one bite at it. And and in the case of Carvana, you're absolutely right. This happened at potentially the worst possible time for the company financially. But if they hadn't done it, where are they now, and where will they be in 5 years? Still struggling to get vehicles, still dealing with distribution issues. This kickstarted everything. And again, I called this a moonshot. For them, it was. And it took a lot of guts to pull this, to do this. And you had to dance on the edge of the razor, with nothing below you to pull it off. They did it. They're starting to reap the benefits, and they'll continue to reap the benefits. This is, when you talk about leveraging your costs, this is a textbook example of an acquisition that will leverage costs and provide you with almost limitless runway to grow your business. I'm old enough to remember, fortunately or unfortunately, an Amazon piece that Barron's published in 1999 called Amazon.bomb. I can't remember who authored it. I do remember, but I'm not going to out the person now because I had a lot of respect for him. Oops. There's another article that ran in Fortune magazine back in the mid 80s when I was still in school. Will anyone catch Kmart? Oops. That didn't age very well. When you look at this through a combination of a retail and tech lens, which is how you really have to look at it, this is a paradigm shift for auto retail. And I look at that addressable market. I look at where ADESA positions them within that market and the efficiencies that they can wring out of that. And they're almost too many to mention.
Well, look, I think the equity markets would agree with your assessment based on the jump in the stock price yesterday on the news. I think it was up 20% or more. I didn't check it this morning, but it was up a lot. So again, forward looking.
Yeah.
They've set themselves up. I do want to go back to what I referred to earlier as the near-death experience, though, because there's something that people are not talking about,
right?
That I think is still relevant, because a lot of the optimism today, well deserved, the trajectory that you've very clearly articulated, I think, is true and solid. But there are the record-setting numbers, the EBITDA and so on, that I referenced earlier in the discussion, are hiding something. I would say, masking something, and that is the debt restructuring that they went through. In that, I think it was approximately $5 billion debt restructuring that they undertook a couple of years ago, approximately. And in so doing, they basically they exchanged the debt that they had outstanding for much more expensive debt, but it got them to push out their debt maturities, which were looming at the time and causing a lot of concerns about bankruptcy. Push out their maturities at the cost of and coming with pickable interest, right? So they don't have to pay that interest until maturity, or somewhere down the road. But the cost was that debt is now, some of it is priced in the teens, right? Very expensive debt for them. Now, given that they're not outlaying interest payments on that debt, I think for the first couple of years of that, that means a lot of these numbers that we're talking about hitting record numbers are not adjusted for that. At least that's what I was able to discern looking into this. So they're higher than they would be if they had to make current payment on their debt.
Absolutely.
For that reason alone. So it's something that, again, if you believe they're on this high growth trajectory, and I think we've made a solid case that seems like that's what they've set themselves up for success in the future. This is all going to be ancient history and a footnote in the history of Carvana, but it is something that certainly colors, at least to some degree, the rosiness of the record-setting numbers that they have coming out now. Maybe you have some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. We both come from the world of fundamental, rating agency, very conservative analysis, and I understand that concern, and it's a very real concern. My focus is above the line there, and it's based on the business. Again, I have a long history with Amazon, and I can remember in a Baa1 rating at Moody's, the company, blew out the balance sheet, doubled the debt component of the balance sheet in 1 year between leases and actual borrowings to build out more data centers, which made infinite sense strategically. You knew that at some point those were going to generate a return. Otherwise, you're not comfortable where you are. And, leverage got up around 4. They were barely covering interest. It was 1 and change. It was well under 2. And I think I went to a negative outlook just for, just to be cautious and to be safe. These guys, again, the fundamentals here are absolutely rock solid. The growth trajectories there. People are not buying less used vehicles. They're still buying, they're buying 40 million a year on average. They've got 1% market share. They've got ADESA, which was one of the factors behind, this whole debt crunch. It was a brilliant acquisition on multiple levels. It costs what it cost. But how often are you able to pick something off like that is strategically transformative for your business? Not very often. That's like lightning striking, and you got to make the move. If you truly believe in the business model, and these guys did, you got to do it, and they did it. Can they outrun the debt? That's the question.
Right.
And you and I both know companies that could not outrun the debt loads. But I'll bring up Toys R Us. Okay, Toys R Us couldn't outrun the debt load, but Toys R Us didn't have the business these guys had, and Toys R Us had some other things going on, and I suffered through that, as did you. It's a different animal, and I'm an ex-banker, an ex-investment banker. If you have a strong business, you find a way to make the debt work between the company and its lenders. Did something creative get done down the road? If necessary, and I don't know that it'll be necessary, because I honestly think these guys are incredibly well positioned for a lot of profitability, even without the financial engineering that they did, creating a little bit of vagueness in the numbers. I think they're well positioned, and they will be able to handle that whenever that happens, however it happens. I think they'll be able to deal with it.
Why don't we turn to outlook now, because and resiliency of the business model, kind of that's what you're speaking to here.
Yeah.
We already talked about the fact that the addressable market is just enormous, and so a lot of room to grow, that they position themselves to take advantage of that. But here we are, used car market prices have been falling for almost 2 years. Rates appear to be coming down now, so that helps, because I think about 80% of their sales are done on credit,
exactly.
Carvana credit, right? So that's another important factor, the affordability aspect of their value proposition, and the quality of the underwriting that they execute on is important to maintain, and so on and so forth. What is their business model resiliency in your view for whatever the rate environment and the consumer spending environment might be?
The way they frame their business is, what's the monthly payment?
Yep.
That's how people shop for cars for the most part. I can remember 1,000 years ago, when I was working for M&T Bank, there was, we had a really good leasing business, and you go in and talk to the client, and it was, what's my monthly payment going to be? They were pretty agnostic to how they got there, but what's my monthly payment going to be? And that's how most consumers handle their budgeting. So if, $500, Ernie Philibro brought this up yesterday with Ernie, and, they use a $500 benchmark. Well, if 500, and I'm not great at math, 500 can buy you a $30,000 car. If rates go up a little bit, it buys you a $28,000 car.
Right.
If you need a car, you're going to buy the $28,000 car. Okay, cars are a need-based bit. In tough economic times, cars are need-based. It's a need-based model, but people are going to buy it. I mean, they're going to buy a car. If they need a car, they're going to buy a car. And if they pay $28,000, $30,000, $25,000, you can't find much under 20 anymore. They're going to do it. So the velocity's still there. Well, the worst year for used cars, and I'm gonna whiff on the year, was right around the financial crisis, and it was like 36 million units. Best was 44 million. And again, I don't have my chart in front of me, and I don't want to put my glasses on to read it. The best year for new vehicles was almost 18 million units. The worst year was 11. Okay, so we've seen variability here. These guys weren't around in that 36 million unit year. They were, and I don't even know if they were around at the 44 million, because I'm messing with the years here, but let's take the 40 million. So if your average price per vehicle is, let's say, $32,000, and because of the rate environment, you can't sell as many $32,000 vehicles as you could before, you're going to sell $30,000 vehicles or $28,000 vehicles. It's a cyclical business. The disadvantage that Ernie's model has is there's no service component to pick up the slack. One of the things that I've called out, or I was calling out when I was publicly covering these guys, was the lack of service. If you look at the franchise dealers, service is the profit driver. Car sales are almost a loss leader for a franchise dealer. You make your money on service and on financing the vehicle. They've got the finance arm. It's proprietary. So if rates go up and they sell a $28,000 vehicle that gets financed at 10% versus a $30,000 vehicle that gets financed at 8%, they're still making money. They've got both sides of this captured. And if the value of the cars is coming down a little bit, that means they're paying less for the vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
So there really is a flywheel here. It's more than just vertically integrated. There's a definite flywheel here for them.
And there's a lot of things to think about, a lot of moving parts here. But I'm thinking, if prices are coming down, first of all, they've navigated the falling used vehicle prices pretty well by evidence of the earnings over the last year and a half. Point number one. So proof is in the pudding, as they say. But what you're doing, you have inventory that you're taking on that's falling in value every day. If prices are dropping, that's a negative. Obviously, it makes it easier to sell them if they're less expensive and they're in demand, as you pointed out. So that's a tailwind. So you have these these winds blowing in different directions. As long as the secret to succeeding in that dynamic an environment, whether interest rates are falling or rising, it seems to me, is moving the vehicles, right?
Yes.
You need to not hold on to the inventory. You need to have enough inventory to, attract customers. You need to have the cars that customers want. And there's an expense to inventorying that car selection. But then you need to sell them quickly. Now with the distribution channel of ADESA on board, they can kind of fast track the low margin vehicles through that channel and hold on to a little bit longer the higher margin vehicles that they can get rid of through their retail channel, as I see it. And I think that's yet another element to this flywheel, as you described it, that is going to pay dividends in whether it's a rising rate environment or a falling rate environment, right?
Yeah, they've got this thing pretty well hedged for any type of competitive environment via the ADESA acquisition, because they're making money auctioning everybody's vehicle. If Joe franchise dealer, I don't want to besmirch any of my old companies, wants to get rid of a used vehicle that's sitting on the lot for 61 days and they've got to pay off the floor plan or whatever. It goes to auction. Carvana sits there and says, "Okay, we'll take it, bring it on," and they auction it. They'll make what they make, and they made money where they wouldn't have made money before. So, falling prices, a tougher consumer environment will benefit that part of their business. And I covered Camping World for a long time with Marcus Lemonis, and one of the windows to the soul of the auto business of car dealers was in the second episode of The Prophet. He buys into a dealer, and a used car dealer had to be on Lincoln Avenue in Chicago, where all the car dealers are. It's kind of like Route 1 here in Langhorne. And the guy had a car on the lot for like 90 days, priced at X, and Marcus walked up to the car, tore up the price sheet, took out a grease pencil, I think, and wrote a new number on it. And the guy went nuts. He said, "Well, I didn't pay much less than that at auction." And Marcus says, "You got to raise the cash. So you sell the vehicle. And if maybe you make a little less money on the vehicle, maybe you sell it at a small loss, but you can go out and buy another vehicle and you live to fight another day." That's an extreme one example. But, when you look at how this business has developed over the years, you had dealers that were wholesaling vehicles and making $100 a vehicle. Now they're retailing and making, $3,000 a vehicle in round numbers. There's a lot of profit play in here to kind of ease the pain if there are some economic upsets. And we've seen that. We've seen used car prices falling. We've seen used car prices go to the moon so that they were somewhat competitive with new prices, especially during the chip shortage.
Right.
And things balance out. This is not a business to make a 1 or 2 year bet. It's a long-term cyclical structured industry. And you have to be able to, it's not going to be great forever and it's not going to be terrible forever. Right. The advantage that these guys have, and I neglected to mention this earlier, but I think it's a compelling point. This has been the most aggressive transition and acquisition market in the 40 years I've been around the industry with dealers. They're consolidating like crazy. Why is that? Well, the smaller dealers are facing the same problem that the smaller brick and mortar retailers faced. They don't have the money to get online. They cannot compete. In order to compete effectively in the auto retail space now, you have to have at least a representative online business. It's expensive. These guys don't have it. So the big dealers are buying up the little dealers. Why are they doing that? Because they see potential for scale. They can invest. They're investing in their online business. They have to get more distribution. They have to get more. In order to leverage that investment, you need to have more vehicles in inventory. Right. I just looked at Lithia last night. They've got 40,000 used cars plus minus on the website. That's a lot. Carvana is under that right now. The goal is to stay at 40. I heard Mark talking about it on the call yesterday, the CFO. Mm-hmm. That's a lot. I mean, I can remember when these guys were in the teens, and even that was a lot back then, because the franchise guys were less than that because they still weren't focusing too much on the used business. But this is fundamentally a stable business, and now that you've got a significant online player out there, people were worried you couldn't buy a car online. Well, that's gone out the window. These guys sold 400. They're selling 400,000 cars. So there's clearly a universal buyer out there that's comfortable doing it. And with the returns that they have, and I didn't dig that deep into the numbers, how many cars get returned. They do have that 7-day return policy. Right. It's not meaningful.
Well, I think it's meaningful to the customer that you can do it, right? But it's not. There aren't a meaningful number of cars that are returned.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
it's a nice safety net for the customer. It gives them some comfort. Yeah. But these guys spend a lot of money reconditioning cars. This is not Joe's car lot where he slaps, four ball tires on it and sells it to you.
I think, I mean, let's spend a little bit of time on that. I mean, the reconditioning centers, there's, I think, in the teens, 15 or 16 of them. Yeah. And that was something that they talked about on the call that, that they're converting some of the ADESA centers sites to be reconditioning centers. Again, building out this national network to get the cars reconditioned closer to the customers that they want to serve, reducing time, reducing expense, and so on and so forth. They're on a trajectory there. That's only going to grow and become bigger. And now they have, as you said, as you pointed out several times now, they have the room to grow, to build this element out. Now, one thing that you touched on another element of their flywheel, as you put it, that they haven't really developed yet, but I think is maybe going to come into play. Maybe I'm speculating here, but is on the servicing side of things. Yeah. Maybe you want to speak to that, because that's an element they really haven't built out yet.
Right. And, they're making money without it. Okay, let's make that clear. It's a lost opportunity right now.
But this is a very important part of the typical used car franchise model. Right. I think they more than 50% of their bottom line comes from servicing vehicles, not part of Carvana's business model at the moment.
Exactly.
But could be. Yeah.
When you look at the franchise dealers, the Penske's and AutoNations and stuff, the guys I used to cover, and the math is fun. Again, I'm not a math guy. Roughly 60% of the gross profit comes from parts and service, somewhere between 50 and 60.
Right.
And it's like 20% of the revenue. It's hugely profitable. And it's the gift that keeps on giving. So, one of the things I criticized them for years publicly, before the recession, after the recession, during the recession, was you guys wholesale a vehicle, you just gave up everything. You're not going to get the service business. You're not going to get the finance business. The service business, someone brings a car into a dealer for service. What usually happens? They end up getting more. It's like going to Costco. They end up getting more than they thought they were going to get. And the dealers love it once they got the car. The franchise dealers have an advantage because they have loaner vehicles. So, it's painless. And some of them have valet service if you're buying a Bentley. But in Carvana's case, they don't have that. And that was one of the risks I saw when I first started looking at these guys was no service component. What are you going to do? You lose the customer. It didn't make sense to develop it when you're selling 50,000 cars a year or 100,000 cars a year. It may not even make sense to do it now. But at some point down the road, they may find that they want to. Now,
Right.
they've got 55, 56 ADESA sites scattered throughout the country. The idea is to, it takes them like a year and a half to convert one to a full-blown reconditioning center. There's a difference between reconditioning and pure service. Reconditioning is a wholesale type business. And it's funny, I don't know if I mentioned this on our last call, but one of the ADESA centers they just reconditioned used to be owned by my wife's family. It was my father-in-law's gravel pit when he was in the concrete business, sold it to ADESA, and now Carvana owns it. So life comes full circle.
That's funny.
It's outside Buffalo. When you need service, there's a couple ways for them to do it. They could build it up themselves. Well, that's a problem because you don't have brick and mortar. So what are you going to do? You could acquire a player, a national player, and I'm just spitballing here. Okay, you could acquire a Pep Boys, you could acquire a Firestone, you could acquire a Goodyear. You could make joint venture deals with those guys so that they can service the vehicles for you. You could make arrangements with regional guys, on a tactical basis. I have Mavis down the street from me here in Bucks County. You could do that. So there's a variety of ways that they could potentially do it. It's, if you try to do it yourself, it's expensive, incredibly expensive. And the return is quick, but not immediate. People are going to have to get used to bringing your cars in. Do you piggyback that with a warranty offering of some sort?
Right.
And then you have to bring it to a Carvana warranty, Carvana center to have the warranty work done. Much like with a dealer. I mean, you don't have to, but it's natural that you do. Right. So there's a few ways they could go after this. The question is, do they want to? Do they feel they need to? And if they do, when? I don't think it'll happen soon because they got a lot on their plate right now.
I was just going to say, they've got a lot to chew on as it is.
Now I can get into now that I'm a quote unquote independent, I can be a little freer with my opinions. I would wait if I were them. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right now, the model's humming along really well. And you may find you can do 1 million cars a year, which would be amazing, and not have to offer service and just give it up. And maybe that's sufficient. Maybe that's enough. Maybe not. But I wouldn't bite that off for a while.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. So why don't we leave it there, Charlie? I mean, they can put that in their back pocket. We covered a lot, and I want to first of all thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Will.
Fantastic insight, as always, as I expected. Really, and I think anyone tuning into this is going to have learned a lot about not just the earnings and how to kind of interpret them, but just Carvana and the used car market in general. There's a lot to chew on in this episode for sure. So really appreciate your time and sharing your expertise with us. Much appreciated. I hope to have you on back again.
Yeah.
You can do it. Thank you very much, Charlie.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
Take care.
Bye. Bye-bye.